Hey everyone, this is Max Wilbert. I'm here in Oregon and it is February 28th. I'm getting ready to leave for the Solidarity Tour around the Philippines. I'm going to be spending the next 4 weeks touring around the country, and we've got a bunch of great events lined up. We've got some trainings, we've got some seminars, we've got some public talks. I'm going to do some book readings, participate in some skill shares and some community gatherings, and I'm looking forward to get out there. I've got a lot to do in the next couple hours to get all my stuff ready, make sure all my preparations in order, and then get on the road to start heading over there. So I'm feeling pretty good. I'm looking forward to getting out there, meeting everyone in person, and getting this thing started. So hopefully I'll see some of you there. またこれより乗務がすぐ行います。ご不要のものがございます。Hello, my name is Max Wilbert. I am from the state of Oregon in the US, and I'm here as part of a tour with the group Deep Green Resistance, radical ecological movement fighting civilization, fighting for revolutionary change around ecological ideas. And I'm here in the Philippines. I'm going to be here for the next month, touring around the country, visiting different communities, visiting schools, visiting different people who are involved in ecological struggle, and trying to learn from them, share my perspectives, and participate in an exchange of ideas around all these things. So we've been preparing for this trip for the past couple months, exchanging ideas and figuring out the itinerary, the details of the different events we'll be doing. I've been getting together my own supplies and putting everything in order so I can leave home for a month and know that everything will be taken care of there. And we had to do some fundraising, getting all the materials together, getting some books and pamphlets sent out here so they can be ready for the different events that we're doing. We got these t-shirts made that we're going to be distributing at the events, and so it seems like we got everything in order now. We're pretty much ready to go. This is my first time in the Philippines, so I didn't know quite what to expect, but the people hosting me have been very generous, very kind. Feeding me, giving me places to stay. So I came in not knowing what to expect and not knowing what it was going to be like here. And it's a process of adjustment to a new climate, a new place, new food, new everything. But I'm starting to settle a little bit and get my feet under me here. And so I'm feeling ready to get out on the road. So the way that I look at it is, we're in a serious situation of ecological crisis. The issues that we're seeing around the world right now, everything from climate change to deforestation, ocean acidification, the destruction of the coral reefs, the erosion of soils, the poisoning of the land and the water through pesticides, mining, the displacement of indigenous communities and land-based communities all over the world. We're seeing an acceleration of this destructive culture. We're seeing everything get worse and worse and worse. So we're here in Metro Manila. As you can see, the city spreads out. It's really a collection of cities that have all merged into one. And you can see the air pollution, the smog, the amount of development going on. Traveling around the city so far, one thing that I've noticed is the extreme disparities in the wealth. You see these really wealthy areas where the rich people are living, where the fancy businesses are, where the streets are clean and wide and there are lots of police, security guards. And then we're in a working class neighborhood here, much more crowded, a lot more people, lots more traffic on the streets. And then, you know, we traveled through some of the real poor neighborhoods where people are living more on the outskirts and putting together whatever homes they can survive in. So you get a sense of what people are dealing with what their lives are like out here. You start to get a little sense. And there's not much left of the natural world out here in the city. A few trees scattered throughout the city here and there, but not much exposed soil. The bay is very polluted over here. The Pasig River over this way, one of the most polluted rivers in the world. And people are breathing in this smog all the time. Filtering the air, you know. We take all the toxins in our breath and we store them in our body, just like a shellfish, like a clam or a mussel. So tomorrow we're going to go to the school in Bacoor, Cavite, and we're going to speak to the students about these issues. We're going to talk about civilization, we're going to distribute some of the books and the pamphlets, and just present an alternative idea to these students who, you know, like most young people, like myself, you know, you grow up in this culture and you get taught just one way of life. You get taught that this is normal, that everything's okay, that things are in control. So we're going to try and present a different alternative idea tomorrow. Culture based on cities is what we call civilization. And this is a definition that's based on history, and it's also based on the root, the linguistic root of this word, civilization, okay? So one way that I like to look at this process is as a form of imperialism. You all know what imperialism is. It's warfare, right? So imperialism is empire building. So when the Spanish came here and colonized the Philippines, they were engaging in imperialism. They were creating a colony so that they could get the resources they wanted here in the Philippines and bring it back to their cities.
Hello, ako nga pala si Ninette. Masaya na nandito, dumating si Max, we were here. At ito'y matagal na naming inaasahan. Kasi noong nakaraang taon ay inilunsad din namin ang climate change issue discussion sa mga estudyante. At gusto namin ito maging taon-taon. Salamat kay Radja at sa tropa diyan sa etniko bandido na naging way ko para ma-meet si Max at makapagbigay sa amin ng magandang lektura na tingin ko ay makakapagpalinaw sa usapin ng climate change at civilization, na ito pala yung culprit na bahagi tayo. So, alam ko na ito ay mag-i-start at sana yung lahat ng mga estudyante pa riyan lumawak itong gawain ganito at magkaroon ulit ng isang talakayan pa at maging taon-taon sana ito.
So the next event, March 7th and 8th, is the Camp and Share. We're going to be out in the province, I believe to the west of here, up in the mountains a little bit. And that event is more of an informal gathering. There are going to be people coming from all over the area, and we're going to camp out. We're going to spend time doing skill shares, sharing information with each other, building relationships with people in the outdoor community, people in the environmentalist community, people who are involved in indigenous struggle, land struggles. So at that event, I'm going to be talking about using ropes. We're going to be talking more about the hard skills that are useful in resistance, useful in survival, climate disaster scenarios, useful to communities who are just facing a lot of challenges in different ways. So we're going to talk about rope skills, and then we're going to talk about media relations in the context of environmental issues and different types of struggles. But we're going to talk about how do you tell your story, how do you reach people with your issues that are happening, and how do you do it in a good way.
sa programa ng Mount Apayang Summer Camp and Share na ito po ay inorganisa ng dalawang ng Summer Advocacy at saka ng Barangay Community ng Mataas ng Pulo. Ngayon po, bago po ang lahat, nagpapasalamat po ako sa bumuo sa bukas upang masilayan natin ang kabundukan at tumapahalaga sa ating kapaligiran.
Ako ay nagpapasalamat sa ating lahat at tayo itulong-tulong. Napakalaking tulong ninyo yung mga pag-iintindi sa ating mga gawain. Maraming salamat at talagang nagpapasalamat ako sa mga mountaineers lahat kanila. At tayo ay natulungan dito sa ating barangay para tayo mamulat ng pagpapaganda ng ating kapaligiran, alagaan ng bundok, mga basura natin yung sinupin, at lahat yung mga pagtatanim natin ng kahimamulat na tayo dapat magtanim. Lang ho at maraming salamat sa inyo.
Para si Marvin Grama. Para sa akin naman para at least sa ganitong paraan makatulong din na maibahagi ko rin kung ano yung meron ako na kung anong paraan na pwede sa bilang sa ating kalikasan, di ba? So yun.
Ako po si Rina Ding Guzman, 36 years nang naninirahan dito sa Barangay Mataas na Pulo. Ngayon po ay nagaganap ang Camp and Share version 2.0 dito po sa Barangay Mataas na Pulo. Ito po ay naglalayon na mas maimulat ang mga tao, lalo na po ang komunidad ng Barangay Mataas na Pulo tungkol po sa mga iba't ibang topic tungkol po sa kalikasan, lalong-lalo na po ang reforestation. May mga iba-iba din pong event at mga speakers na mag-lecture sa mga bata, pati na rin po sa mga tao sa community.
Magandang gabi! Kami ang Kontra Gabi! Nandito kami ngayon sa Camp and Share 2020!
Nandito kami ngayon dahil naniniwala kami na dapat kaming magbigay o magbalik dun sa mga komunidad o mga pamayanan na nagbibigay sa amin ng inspirasyon para gawin itong gantong klaseng musika. Naniniwala rin kami at masaya kami na inimbita kami dito at sa itong inisyatiba ng komunidad mismo para matuto at makapagbahaginan. Naniniwala rin kami na yung musika at sayaw ay para sa lahat at yung kakayahan na mag-organisa ay para rin sa lahat.
Salamat din po kami sa pag-imbita sa amin para maibahagi namin yung musika namin ngayong gabi. At sana matuwa kayo sa pagtatanghal namin. At sana po magkaroon din ng mga iba pang mga ganitong pagtitipon sa hinaharap.
name's Wilbert. I came here from the United States, from Oregon, and I just shared a workshop on basic climbing skills, technical rope. We talked about how to ascend a rope, how to rappel or descend a rope. Went through some basic knots, and I think this is useful material for multiple reasons. We talked about getting up into trees. In the US, I've been involved in the environmental movement where we use these techniques to protect forests, to blockade logging roads, and so on. And it's also important in guiding. I have a background in rock climbing and mountaineering, taking kids and people out into the wilderness. And these techniques can be adapted to those type of situations. So as the local community here gets increasingly into guiding people in these mountains, these can be useful skills. They can also be useful, I think, in disaster scenarios, any sort of rescue situation. It's important to know ropes and how to use them well, how to use them safely. So I'm really glad to be here. I feel very incredibly welcomed by this community. Everyone's been very loving and open to having me here and friendly. And it's beautiful to be here beneath the mountain. We swam in the river this morning. It's just been wonderful, so thank you. So I'm here on Mount Batulao in the Philippines. We're west of Manila. Batulao means mountain of stone. You can see these big rock formations and these ridges coming up. The habitat up here in the high country is these native grasses. You can see there's lots of birds flying around, and the landscape you can see over here. So Manila Bay is over this way. Taal Lake and Taal volcano, the whole lake is a crater. That's over here. That's the area where some of you may remember just a few months ago there was a eruption over there. The main highway comes in along the ridge above Taal over here. Comes in this way, comes in between this valley right here. And that highway used to just be one lane, and before that used to just be a dirt track, a path that people would go on with horses and on foot. Now it's a 2 to 4 lane highway, and you're seeing the expansion along this road of malls, subdivisions, development of all kinds of business. This is the expansion that's inherent in capitalism and more broadly civilization. And what we're seeing as a result of that is the protected areas, like these mountains that have typically in the past been too steep to bother with farming, too steep to bother with living on. There's no water up here for much of the year, except in the rainy season. The poor people are being pushed up to these mountains. So on our way up along this ridge line right here, we saw towards the bottom, we saw people who have been forced to make a living on these extremely steep hillsides, farming these hillsides, and they are causing huge amounts of soil erosion. They're expanding the deforestation. There's problems. You can't blame these people because they have no other options. They're extremely poor and they have no choice in this situation. And this is one of the tragedies inherent in civilization and why we need to question this way of life based on agriculture, based on the growth of cities, based on this growth imperative. The indigenous people of these islands lived here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years without substantially harming the land. In fact, they increased the biodiversity of the land. And there are still many, many remnants of that way of life alive here. There are indigenous people living all throughout these communities, and they're still engaging in some of their traditional practices. Yesterday, I was spending time with a woman who was giving an herbal medicine workshop, traditional herbal medicine, nutrition, talking about ways of health without relying on the pharmacy, without relying on products from a profit-driven industry. And last night, a couple of the local boys took me fishing in one of the streams over here. We actually went shrimping with the little spear gun, handmade spear gun, homemade spear gun, and by hand catching these shrimp out of the stream. And we cooked them up and ate them for dinner last night, along with some snails and some other food from the land here. So the Philippines was colonized around 500 years ago by the Spanish, and then the United States won a war against the Spanish and took over as the colonizer. And since that time, for 500 years, this land has been gradually being destroyed and exploited for profit, for the growth imperative, for a small class of elites, while most of the people have suffered. And the Philippines is officially decolonized now. It's officially an independent nation, but it's in a neo-colonial situation. The colonization is economic, it's structural, it's built into the world economy and how it functions today. And it's enforced via all kinds of policies, such as international loans, trade agreements, outsourcing of labor, outsourcing of pollution and production. And we're seeing this play out all across this land here. And, people here are fighting back. They're organizing in different ways. And in my experience so far, there is a high level of political consciousness, revolutionary consciousness, and increasingly a building ecological consciousness. A lot of the roots for that, I think, are still there, even though they were partially destroyed over the past couple generations via colonization. But the roots are still there. People still remember some of the old ways here. And so I'm very blessed to be up here this morning and seeing this, and I hope to share this story with you all and tell you about what's happening here. It's the same story that's happening all over the world. So I'm here on Mount Apayang in Nasugbu, Batangas, Philippines. We're southwest of Manila in the southern part of Luzon, and Mount Apayang is one of the few remaining areas in the country. There are some, but not that many, where you have old growth forest, forest that's never been destroyed. So this is the next mountain over here, and you can see agriculture is starting to spread up the flanks of that mountain. The community that lives there, according to the people I've been with, they're not doing a very good job of protecting their mountain. And because of that, they're going to have increasing water problems, drought, erosion, flooding, all kinds of issues. People here have a pretty good understanding. They're starting to build a good understanding of environmental issues, according to the woman who I'm staying with, starting about 5 years ago. Some friends of mine who are involved in environmental organizing here in the Philippines came to the community and started doing education and solidarity work and communicating with the people about the environmental issues, the need to protect the forests, the importance of all these things. And it's led to some really good results. The community here, led by the youth, is doing reforestation efforts in some of the lower slopes of the mountain where it has been cut over in the past. They have educational efforts, they have events, and they're building an environmental ethic from the ground up. So this forest has already been heavily impacted. I mean, all these lands over here that you see, agriculture lands, the urban areas back over this way, there's an ethanol plant right there for producing fuel and alcohol from sugarcane. All of this used to be old growth jungle. The entire nation was pretty much old growth jungle, and about 3% of that is remaining, which is congruous with the situation in the US, where there's 2% of the old growth forest remaining. So there are still pythons in this forest. They're rare, and they used to be very big, but they're still here. There are still some of them. There's some wildlife. The deer, the native deer, have been wiped out from this area through overhunting. Wild boar wiped out from this area through overhunting. The Philippine eagle, I believe, still lives here. It's very endangered. It's the national bird of the Philippines, monkey-eating eagle. Yeah, there are monkeys in here as well. We haven't seen them yet. But you can see just how gorgeous this old forest is all throughout this area here, these valleys. Thick, thick forest. After that, on March 12th, we're going to have the first event at the University of the Philippines. This is going to be an environmental symposium, so there are going to be 4 speakers at this event. I'm going to be speaking about the problem of civilization. Jasim's going to be speaking about community defense, I believe. We're going to have another speaker talking about decolonization, and then another speaker talking about climate change, the issues of climate change.
Magiging 3 na lang yung ating task pagkakwentuhan. I-discuss ng mga kasama natin. Yung isa yung tungkol sa civilization, yung Max Wilbert. Tapos yung community defense, i-discuss ni Jack. Tapos yung decolonization, i-present ni Pascal.
presentations before. Chris, thanks for the introduction. Thanks to Lapis and everybody here for hosting. I appreciate that. So we've been talking about colonization, about community defense, and I'm going to talk about civilization. And I want to start by talking about some of the symptoms of the problem that we're seeing. So we all know the issues with global warming. We know what's happening to the planet. Temperatures are rising catastrophically. We're going to get to the point pretty soon where places like Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, are going to have temperatures that human beings can't survive for long periods of time outside. So they're becoming increasingly dependent on air conditioning, on artificial cooling. That's going to spread over the planet. We're seeing a rise in typhoons in the Philippines. There's a lot of climate risk in this area. And then, of course, we're in the 6th mass extinction event, which could be called the mass extermination event, because it's not a natural thing. It's happening because of this culture, the dominant culture, right? We could go on and on. The average mother has something like 200 chemicals in her breast milk that she industrial chemicals that she passes on to her children through the breast milk. There's plastic pollution, in the deepest parts of the ocean, the Marianas Trench, 35,000 feet, under the water, 10,000 meters underwater. And there's plastic in the snow on top of the Rocky Mountains and in the high Himalaya, because tiny plastic particles are just floating in our atmosphere. We're saturated in toxins, in this society. and we wonder why we have an increase in cancer and heart disease and diabetes and all these different things, right? We all know these things, I think. If anybody's paying attention, which I think we all are, then you know the scale of the problems that we're facing. And I think that we need to recognize that these things are symptoms of a deeper problem. So when you go to a doctor and you're sick, the doctor does a diagnosis on you to try and figure out what the problem is. Because without a proper diagnosis, you can't actually fix the underlying issue. You can only treat the symptoms of the disease. And I think we see a lot of that in social justice movements, environmental movements, all kinds of movements around the world. I think we see a lot of people focusing on symptoms of the deeper problems and not ever really analyzing the roots of the situation. And that's where the word radical comes from, right? I think some of you know this, I'm sure, right? It comes from the Greek, I think a Greek word radix, which means root. So a radical is somebody who goes to the root, analyzes the situation, not just at a surface level, but goes deeper to get a sense of what's really happening, right? So we need a diagnosis. We need a diagnosis. And Bas talked about decolonization. And I believe that the root of the problem that we are facing is colonization. And there are different terms that we can use to talk about that. Some people refer to it as colonization. Some people refer to it as civilization. Some people refer to it, I like to use the term often, the culture of empire. Because I think that's the main problem that is driving all these issues we're seeing in the world today, is a culture of empire, a culture of expansion, a culture of theft, a culture of extraction, arrogance, yeah. This is the dominant culture around the world today. Yeah, and in several North American indigenous traditions, this is called the Wetiko disease or the Wendigo disease. They refer to it as a psychological or a spiritual illness, a disease that makes people just want to consume and consume and consume. It makes them greedy, right? And so this idea of the Wetiko is somebody who's been infected with the civilized mindset, with the colonizer's mindset, right? And that's the decolonization, I think, because I think we all grew up in this dominant culture, so we all have some of that in our minds. So I think that's part of the decolonization, like you were talking about. Let's root out those ideas, those Wetiko ideas within ourselves, and get rid of them, right? So this idea of the Wetiko, another important element of it is that it's a highly contagious disease. It's like coronavirus, right? It spreads, and it spreads through ideology. It spreads through culture. It spreads through television, radio, mass media, all these different methods. And it also spreads through, violence, through domination, through the actual warfare of colonization, right? So a way that I look at this culture as, it is a culture of empire. And what a culture of empire does is it ruthlessly extracts all the resources from its land, where it starts, where it begins, right? Because it's selfish, it doesn't care about our kin, the non-humans, it doesn't care about the forest, it doesn't care about the other forms of life. It's selfish, right? So they extract everything and they destroy the land where they start. And then they're in a situation where they have to expand. They have to go elsewhere because they want to grow, and they've destroyed the land where they started, so they have to colonize other places, and they have to invade. And that's why civilizations are always cultures based on warfare and expansionism. After the symposium at the University of the Philippines, we're going to have a book launching event at Roel's Bookshop. We're going to talk about the book that I wrote that's called We Choose to Speak. It's an essay collection of essays I wrote between 2013 and 2018. Also at Roel's, there's going to be some artists, there's going to be some musicians performing. We're going to have some of the hosts playing some traditional music instruments, and that'll be part of the event to get people out and have a good time. Thanks for that, Chris. I wrote this book. It's actually a collection of essays that I wrote between 2013 and 2018. My friend Boris put the collection together in Germany and actually printed the book. So I gotta give a shout out to Boris for helping with that. So I'm just gonna read a quick excerpt and then we'll go to the music because I know that's what y'all are really here for. Okay, this is an essay that I wrote last winter in February of 2018. It's called Resource Extraction and Revolutionary Unity. One person died and another was badly burned when a gas well exploded here last year, my friend says, pointing to an oil well set back 100 yards from the road. We're on the plains beneath the Front Range in Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains meet the flatlands. This is oil country. Wells and fracking rigs are everywhere.
Land, domestic air and domestic sea travel to and from Metro Manila shall be suspended beginning March 15, 2020 and to end on April 14, 2020.
Okay everyone, so it's March 13th and the unexpected has happened. We are having to cancel the rest of the tour because of the coronavirus. I wish that we could keep going, but the reality is that the government is shutting down travel through parts of the Philippines. There's a lockdown situation that's going to be initiated within the next 24 to 36 hours here in Metro Manila. So a lot of the upcoming stops on the tour are going to be impossible for us to make happen. I'm feeling pretty sad about this. I'm not terribly surprised because I've been tracking this coronavirus situation since the beginning and I knew that it might impact my travel over here. We know, looking at history, looking at epidemiology, that diseases like this tend to emerge from civilized societies. They tend to emerge from industrial agriculture, industrial capitalism, and especially this intensive animal feeding operations, factory farms, and the associated, industrialization of wild foods that we're seeing. So it's not unexpected that this happens, and then of course cities are the perfect breeding ground for disease. So I think that this outbreak shows in many other ways the bankruptcy of civilization, the bankruptcy of this modern way of life. And we're going to see increasing fragility, increasing instability of this system going forward. Capitalism is very dynamic and adaptable. It can defend itself against these type of threats and adapt to them. And we're seeing that already in terms of, the poor are the ones who are going to be hardest hit by this crisis. They're the ones who are going to lose their jobs, are not going to have any source of income, are going to have to take care of ailing elders in their community and so on. So capitalism, the rich people, on the other hand, are going to be pretty well off in general. So it's no surprise that this situation is happening, but I think that in the future we need to expect more crises like this. Combine this coronavirus type situation with climate disasters, with major typhoons in areas like this, with wildfires, with increasing wildfires, with desertification and food shortages due to climate disasters and extreme weather events. Combine it with climate-driven refugee crises driven by sea level rise and extreme weather and so on. And we are entering a time of increased instability. This is going to be more and more normal going forward. And to me, that points to two different things. One, we need to build networks of mutual aid and solidarity. We need to support each other. We need to rebuild strong community and relocalize our food systems, our medical systems, our communities in general. And then two, I think we need to resist, because the reality is that for as dependent as we are on this industrial system right now, it's not a system that we can count on into the future. And in fact, it's destroying the only chance at a future that we have. So the sooner we can shut down this industrial system that's killing the planet, the better. And in that sense, the coronavirus is causing a dramatic reduction in pollution. and doing more to fight the climate crisis than the mainstream environmental movement has ever done. That doesn't diminish the tragedy of the people who are affected by this, and I'm sure we're all going to be affected by it either directly or people we know and love in our families and communities. That doesn't diminish the tragedy of that. These two things coexist at the same time. So, I'm sad to be leaving. I feel like I've learned a lot as part of this trip. Learning about the history of the Philippines, the Spanish occupation, the American occupation, the war, the period since World War II of official decolonization, but the neoliberalization of the economy, the nationalistic period under Marcos, and then this sort of opening of the Philippines to the world market under the Aquinos. And I've learned a bit about the land here. I've gotten a chance to get out in the mountains, to walk the peaks, to walk through the jungles, to see some intact old forest, to swim in some of the rivers and hunt for shrimp in the streams, to talk with people all over the communities. And I've really been struck by the generosity and the kindness of the people here. So I have a lot of thank yous that I have to send out. First, to the MNP community for welcoming me into your homes. I cannot thank you enough. It was a true blessing to be there. And Tati Resti and Mount Butulao, we had an amazing time up there. It's an amazing place, and really a case study in how this civilization is pushing poor people and marginal people towards the brink and towards these literally marginal lands in terms of agricultural production, trying to make a living in this system, trying to survive in this brutal system. Lapis and Shareware, Roel's bookstore, for hosting events. Really appreciate that. We've had a great time. I wish that we could go ahead with the rest of the events, but we managed to bang out quite a few in the time I've been here. And then I want to say thanks to the people who I missed. So hopefully I will get to meet you all soon and see the Bulacan crew, the Mindoro crew, the Davao crew, everyone in the network who was going to come out to those events, who participated in planning and helping to organize. I really appreciate it. I'm very sad that we have to call this off early, but we don't really have a choice at this point. And last but not least, I have to give a huge thank you to the crew here in Manila, who, including the guy behind the camera right here, who really put in a ton of work to get me out here, to organize all these events, to coordinate the travel, coordinate the logistics, the food, come pick me up at the airport, take care of me, give me a place to sleep, make sure that I'm healthy and happy and well rested. The love and solidarity and kindness from you all has been incredible, so I cannot thank you enough, literally. And finally, I want to say this isn't the end. I am planning on coming back to the Philippines. We're going to do a round 3 DGR tour. I don't know when that will be. The global travel situation is looking like it might be pretty messed up for quite a while potentially, and we're going to have to see how this plays out. So I don't know when I'll be back, but I will be back, and I look forward to seeing everyone who I miss at that time. Thank you.